Hey fam. Between this and my last video, it seems I'm on a bit of a cyberspace kick, but let's roll with it. This is another one of those topics I've had kicking around in the back of my head for a while, but for no particular reason, I'm only just now getting around to talking about it. I'm a millennial with some big boy nostalgia for Digimon. It's quite possibly one of my most nostalgic franchises, but it's always kind of lagged behind in the games department. I feel that a lot of this is due to equal parts infrequent and experimental releases, but I think another obstacle to the broader, more mainstream success of Digimon games is something that people don't really talk about much online. There sort of is no definitive Digimon game experience. That's a pretty vague statement, so to demonstrate what I mean, I'm gonna make a quick Pokemon comparison. Please keep in mind that I'm not a Pokemon elitist by any means. I'm far more attached to Digimon, and if you've seen the one Pokemon-related video on this channel, then you'll know that there's no love lost between me and modern Pokemon. But one thing I think that Pokemon has nailed since the very beginning is a real sense of synergy between the anime and the games. And for a multimedia franchise like this, that synergy is very important. When juxtaposing Pokemon and Digimon, the classic line is always Pokemon has the better games, while Digimon has the better show. And I echo that sentiment, broadly speaking. But I think a large part of what makes Pokemon games so much more compelling for most fans of the property as a multimedia entity is that the games actually resemble the experience portrayed in the anime. They don't cast the player in the shoes of Ash Ketchum, but the fundamental rules of the world, the way things work, the rules of Pokemon combat and evolution, the way regions are laid out, the unique varieties of Pokemon native to each of these regions, these things tend to be very consistent between the games and the anime. When you play a Pokemon game, it really feels like you are immersed in the world portrayed by the show. Digimon games, however, even at their very best, have almost never accomplished this, and they've certainly never nailed it. To demonstrate my point, I want to break down what I like to think of as the Digimon game franchise's Big Three today. This refers to the three most recent and modern entries released in all regions: Digimon World Next Order, Digimon Survive, and the Cyber Sleuth duology. To be clear, I don't necessarily mean to imply that these are the end-all be-all of their respective sub-franchises. I'm still personally very attached to the DS-era Digimon story games, for example. I love their sprite art, more vibrant color palettes, and while I love that modern Digimon games kind of grew up with their audience, as evidenced by their older core casts, I feel like the DS story titles capture more of the childhood magic of the earlier seasons, which makes them worth returning to on their own merits from time to time. On top of that, I know that many fans of the World entries remain partial to the original Digimon World, for both nostalgic reasons and its own elements of exploration and world building, which were never nailed quite as well again in later installments. I myself do prefer some elements of redigitized Decode to Next Order, but for all intents and purposes, the Big Three are the most modern entries, with the best quality of life features, and are the most readily accessible to the average player, and especially series newcomer. Additionally, many of the fundamental points I'm going to be looking into do roughly apply in a blanket fashion to earlier story and world titles as well. To start with, I actually want to hit the Cyber Sleuth duology first, because this is often cited as being the overall best gaming experience that Digimon has to offer. And while I 100% agree with this sentiment, I still don't think it's a truly definitive Digimon experience in the way that Pokemon games are for their franchise. So, the Cyber Sleuth games are great games, which is why they're always the most recommended. Foundationally, they're just solid, traditional, turn-based JRPG titles. They were clearly made on a budget, but it's clear that a considerable portion of that budget actually went into the Digimon models and animations. Cyber Sleuth gives you the opportunity to just get in there and catch 'em all. While combat is limited to 3 Digimon per team, the player gets to keep a very generous stable of Digimon in their traveling party and an insane roster of backup Digimon in the Digifarm. The Digifarm as a mechanic in general is so brilliant, I'm frankly shocked that Pokemon hasn't copied it yet. It's basically the ability to passively raise Pokemon in your PC, but I digress. Despite having the overall best gameplay in the Digimon Pantheon, bar none, the Cyber Sleuth games, in my opinion, actually fumble the ball the hardest of all the sub-series in the story and world-building departments. What I mean by this isn't that the story and world-building are poor, but that they don't really feel like Digimon at all. For one thing, there's absolutely no exploration of the digital world. I'm not saying that the entirety of a Digimon game needs to take place in the digital world, but I am saying that Cyber Sleuth's Eden and Kowloon are distinctly not the digital world. They're a form of traditional cyberspace, but they're not the digital world proper. And the games themselves even acknowledge this by giving you a teeny tiny peek into that world towards their finales. And that's part of the problem too. The stories themselves don't actually feel like Digimon stories until their final acts, when the Royal Knights and so forth begin actually invading the human world. Before this point, the Digimon themselves are portrayed in-universe as mere programs. Most of them don't even speak, or have any sort of agency. Barring the villains, and rare exceptions like Nokia's Agumon and Gabumon, there are very few actual Digimon characters. Most of them are just mindless husks that do battle for you and the other hackers. If we're to use the anime as a guiding star, that's just not Digimon. Not my Digimon, anyway. See, as fun as collecting them all inherently is in a game setting, the Digimon anime isn't about that. Human tamers walking around with parties of 3 mute Digimon isn't a thing. They have one partner who they have a real bond with. That's the way it works. That's Digimon. That's why every time the show deviates from that formula, like with Frontier and Fusion, people start freaking out. The Digimon story games do an admirable job adapting elements such as digivolution into higher forms and degeneration into lower forms, because that's a very noticeable core mechanical difference in the way Digimon operate compared to contemporaries like Pokemon. But while digivolution and degeneration work here as a mechanic the way they've been implemented, they also don't really resemble the way they work in the show. In the show, Digimon, which are bonded to a human partner, digivolve to higher stages both in response to literal threats that they need to rise to the occasion to meet, but also in resonance with key moments of emotional growth on the part of their human partners. Digivolution in the anime is famously an allegory for human maturation. It's understandable that this would be basically impossible to properly translate into a collect-em-all style monster taming RPG, but it's another thing that keeps Cyber Sleuth from being a true, quote-unquote, definitive Digimon game, in my eyes. And degeneration? Forget it, they're not even close. Degeneration in the story games goes one stage at a time and is completely voluntary. In the anime, it happens because Digimon with human partners need to expend stamina or energy in order to maintain their stronger forms for battle. When they degenerate, it's more akin to when a human finally sits down on the couch after a strenuous workout. It's not whatever weird stat-enhancing shenanigans the story games use it for. And I want to stress yet again that I am by no means attempting to slander the Cyber Sleuth or any other Digimon story titles. I still firmly feel that they're great, extremely fun games that I have a blast with. Cyber Sleuth in particular is still the Digimon game I would most recommend to the average gamer and Digimon fan alike. I think it's the best overall gaming experience that Digimon has to offer. But it isn't a definitive Digimon game. There are just too many elements from the show that are nowhere to be found. Digimon Survive, then, is exceptionally tragic to me because, on paper, it could so easily have been this definitive Digimon experience I've been waiting for. Anyone who's played it knows that it really feels like a spiritual successor to the original season of Digimon Adventure, just with its protagonists aged up a bit and a noticeably darker take on the digital world. It features a small core cast of human kids who have singular Digimon partners with fleshed-out personalities and actual agency in the story. The setting is, again, for all intents and purposes, the digital world of the show, from its mechanics to its aesthetics. And for the first and so far only time in the history of Digimon games, Digivolution and Degeneration actually work exactly the way they do in the show. Digivolution to new stages is tied to key moments of growth on the part of the human partner, and degeneration is always straight back down to rookie form after battle because the Digimon expend stamina in order to maintain higher evolutions. The player can still recruit extraneous wild Digimon to their cause, but Digivolution works differently for them, relying instead on a special expendable item that places them permanently in a higher form, which they don't need stamina to maintain, but giving them lower base stats and by extension combat potential in exchange. This is, as I just said, exactly how it works in the show, down to Digimon who don't have human partners abiding by different rules for Digivolution. It is a genuine revelation for Digimon games in general, and I really hope that later titles at the very least keep this, if nothing else, from Survive. So, if Survive nails the feel of Digimon like nothing that came before it, if it gets the characters and settings so right, while even adapting the Digivolution mechanics with 100% faithfulness to the source material, then why is it not the definitive Digimon game, you may ask? Because, unfortunately, as an actual game, it's arguably one of the worst that Bandai has ever put out. What I needed from this game was for it to be the Shin Megami Tensei Devil Survivor of Digimon, a tactical RPG set within the property which simply conveyed its story via visual novel elements. Instead, it's simply a visual novel with an occasional smattering of mediocre and overly simplistic tactical RPG combat. It's 70% visual novel and 30% combat, with the combat itself being severely underbaked. Also, how does a game that looks like this and has like 3 polygons total to its name run like such hot, steamy ass on the Switch? I am seriously getting so fucking tired of this shitty, underpowered, limp dick excuse for a console that can't even run up-res ports of fucking PS2 games at 60 FPS. My point overall is that if Cyber Sleuth nailed the game part while fumbling a large portion of the Digimon part, then Survive nailed the Digimon part while completely shitting the bed on the actual game part. Which brings us to Digimon World Next Order, which in my opinion is a fairly anticlimactic place to end, but this also speaks to the larger issue of there being no definitive Digimon game at all. So why am I choosing to end on Next Order when it's neither the best game nor the most recent one? I wanted to save it for last because I think of it as the middle ground game when it comes to the big three, which is interesting. Unfortunately, it's not the middle ground insofar as it achieves the best balance of game quality to Digimon-ness ratio, but in the sense of it being a jack of both trades and a master of none, rather than excelling at one while more or less completely missing the other. Again, like with Cyber Sleuth and the other Digimon story titles, a lot of what I'm going to say about Next Order can essentially be applied to the rest of the Digimon World subseries. Next Order and its predecessors notably take a great deal of inspiration from Digimon's primordial origin as a V-Pet. And while I think this homage is a very cool idea that at least has some crossover with the way Digimon work in the anime source material, it will also pretty much always be one of the biggest ball and chains wearing these games down. First, let me hit the elements of the game I like though. Next Order is actually set in the digital world. This incarnation of the digital world greatly resembles its appearance in the anime, from its general vibe all the way down to the surreal and unnatural fusion of nature and technology woven into the landscape. The world itself is really one of the stars of the show, and is a real joy to explore and get immersed in. Additionally, Next Order features a small core cast of human characters with singular partners bonded to them, and these partners have actual dialogue, personalities, and agency in the narrative. Technically, the protagonist and the ultimate antagonist have two partners, but the unusual nature of this is acknowledged in the story, and the protagonists of the prior two world titles only have one. The story itself also feels like a Digimon story. The Digimon take center stage. It takes place in their world, and the protagonists are essentially a small band of Digidestined. Furthermore, Next Order is built like an actual video game, with an actual game loop. You train and maintain your Digimon so that they can digivolve into stronger forms, all while making exploratory excursions out into the vast and varied landscape of the digital world in order to recruit new Digimon to the town, which serves as your central base of operations. While there are plenty of, for lack of a better term, feral Digimon to fight in the overworld, there are also tons of recruitable NPC Digimon, which also have their own personalities, aspirations, and dialogue to convey those things, because Next Order and its ilk actually remember that Digimon can speak and are supposed to be fully sentient, not just empty husk programs used by hackers in man-made cyberspace. Combat itself is nowhere near as fun or developed as it is in Cyber Sleuth, but it's still engaging in its own simple sort of way, and demands more and more of your attention the less overpowered your Digimon are. So, where does Next Order falter, aside from the combat being okay, but not as good as in Cyber Sleuth? Well, that brings me back to the aforementioned ball and chain that is the Digimon raising mechanics. Once again, even here in Digimon World, the rules and nature of Digivolution do not work the way they do in the show, and I would argue that they're even less representative of the show than Cyber Sleuth is. In Next Order, you digivolve your Digimon by manually raising their stats to certain thresholds through training, and Digivolution is linear. Degeneration simply doesn't exist. Players will inevitably end up spending their time with lower evolutions throughout their playthrough, but this is simply because your Digimon have a limited lifespan, and when they die, they are reverted back to their lowest form for you to start the process all over again. This is admittedly how the world games allow you to explore multiple Digivolution trees while feeling bonded to only one or two partners, but it also creates one of the weirdest and most ungratifying gameplay loops I have ever seen. Like, if this shit wasn't tied to a Digimon game, I wouldn't give it the time of day in a million years. Despite Next Order's town-building gameplay loop being surprisingly addictive, the rogue element of your Digimon partner's mortality is the most obnoxious pace breaker ever conceived. No matter how much time or effort you put into a Digimon, it is only mortal. So you will inevitably need to periodically just stop what you're doing in the story or your acquisition of new town members and just start raising a baby up from scratch again. They do get stronger and stronger by default with each new reincarnation, but never nearly to the degree that any serious amount of work is cut out on the player's end. This is literally the worst form of grinding in the history of video games. It is astoundingly bad. It is literally forced, periodic mega grinding that you don't even get to permanently keep the benefits of. And it is the reason I could never, in good faith, recommend a Digimon World game to anybody, despite titles like Next Order achieving what is otherwise a very nice middle ground between Cyber Sleuth and Survive. And to make matters even worse, there's the ludonarrative dissonance of the fact that in Redigitize and Next Order, the other human characters' Digimon partners don't even abide by the same rules that the players do. While their Digivolution is completely linear with no degeneration at any point as well, barring a rare instance of total reincarnation due to plot shenanigans, the other tamers simply have immortal partners who slowly work their way up from rookie to mega across the duration of the story. And as such, their Digimon get to have actual dialogue and personalities. Only the player has to deal with the burdens of mortality, apparently, and this discrepancy is never addressed in-game. Which brings me back to my original assertion. For all the years that Digimon has been around as an IP, And all the games that have released for it, experimental or otherwise, there's still no truly definitive Digimon game. There's no title that nails both the gameplay and story. There's no title that fully captures the feel and mechanical lore of the anime, while also just being a good game. That makes me sad, but more importantly, I wouldn't be surprised if it's a key reason why Digimon fell so far from the public conscience, aside from, overall franchise neglect. I'm hopeful that the upcoming new entry in the Digimon Story subseries will at least improve over Cyber Sleuth in the story department. I'm pretty sure I read somewhere that it's going to take place at least partially in the digital world proper, which is a good sign if true, but it's still going to be a Digimon story game, with all the anime incongruous mechanics that come with that. What I'd like to see more than anything is another stab at something like Digimon Survive, with more priority given to the actual gameplay, or possibly even a more traditional RPG, where your party is made up of Digimon bonded to a party of human companions, even if that comes at the expense of collecting them all for 1 or 2 games. Sort of like the Digimon Adventure PSP or Data Squad PS2 licensed games, except, good. But whatever Bamco Nandai chooses to do with future Digimon games, I really think they should prioritize making a truly definitive experience. A true Digimon killer app. Not in terms of scope and budget necessarily, but in terms of really capturing the lore and essence of the show, which is the true heart of the franchise, and doing so without compromising quality of game design. Until then, I'll just be here, digivolving from disappointed Mon into waiting patiently Mon. And if you're hearing this, then thanks for sticking around to the end. Let me know in the comments how you feel about the current state of Digimon games. Do you agree with my takes here? Disagree? I say this in almost every video, but I really make these to have a conversation, so I always pay attention to and engage with the comments. I'm not just asking this for the algorithm. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed, and to see you next time. Peace out. Also subscribe!